Is it time to scale back the war on alien plants and animals? The cane toad is the Darth Vader of the amphibian world. A native of Central and South America, the lumpy toad was turned loose in Australia in the 1930s. Farmers hoped it would eat the beetles that were damaging sugarcane crops. The toad made itself at home, spreading steadily across the land. As the toad multiplied, though, conservationists started to worry. The toad secretes a goo that can be toxic when eaten. Some feared that the imported amphibian would kill off snakes, crocodiles, and other local predators. For years, the cane toad has been the poster child of invasive species. An invasive species is a plant or an animal that settles in a new region, where it does harm to the environment, the economy, or human health. Conservationists regularly take up arms against plant and animal invaders by trapping, hunting, poisoning, or bulldozing them. A growing number of scientists have now begun to argue, however, that conservationists are too hung up on the native versus non-native distinction. The public has embraced the idea of hating non-native species, says Mark Davis, a biologist at Macalester College in St. Paul, Minnesota. There's no scientific basis for that. Hitching a ride. It's easier than ever for people to move around the planet, often bringing other species along for the ride. Sometimes that's done on purpose. Gardeners have been moving desirable plants from one continent to continent for centuries. Other times, non-native species are accidental tourists. Zebra mussels arrived in the Great Lakes after being inadvertently toted across the ocean in the ballast of ships. Scientists estimate that some 50,000 foreign species have settled in the U.S. Among them is the python, a 6-meter, 20-foot Asian constrictor. Florida pet owners dump pythons into the wild, and they're now spreading across Everglades National Park. Another is kudzu, a vine from Japan that grows as much as a foot in one day and is running rampant across the southeastern U.S. Then there's the zebra mussel, which clogs water pipes and does hundreds of millions of dollars in damage to power plants and water utilities around the Great Lakes. Billions of dollars are spent in the U.S. alone to control invasive species each year. Tim Mayle, Vice President of Conservation Policy at Defenders of Wildlife, says the country should do even more to fight non-native species. It's rarer than it should be that people are going out and trying to control non-native species in some of our most special habitats, he says. Mayle and his colleagues are engaged in the preservation of the country's ecological niches. An ecological niche is a unique position that a species fills in an ecosystem. The species' habitat, the food it eats, and the predators that eat it. If non-native species are allowed to invade local niches, Mayle says, we're affecting the species that are present now, and we're also significantly affecting the future web of life forever. Toad hype. Davis agrees that some non-native species are harmful, and he agrees that vigorous efforts should be made to prevent the accidental introduction of foreign species to new habitats. But too many biologists assume non-native means harmful, he says. He and 18 other ecologists made that case in the scientific journal Nature this past summer. It is time for scientists, land managers, and policymakers to ditch this preoccupation with non-native species, they wrote. Some non-native species aren't as bad as they're made out to be, say the ecologists. Take the cane toad, the horror of which hasn't lived up to the hype. While the toad's presence led to a decline in some predator population in Australia, most species weren't impacted at all, scientists reported recently. Some species actually benefited from the toad's arrival. And consider the salt cedar, a shrub brought from Africa and Eurasia to the western U.S. in the 1800s. Between 2005 and 2009, the U.S. government spent $80 million fighting the shrub because it's suspected of soaking up too much valuable groundwater from its desert habitat. But, notes Davis, the shrub is now the favorite nesting site for the southwestern willow flycatcher, an endangered bird. The shrub may be doing more good than harm. Some non-native species do nothing but good. Honeybees are an example. They pollinate more than 100 crops in the U.S., providing an estimated value of more than $9 billion a year. Honeybees are an import from Europe, but nobody's suggesting they buzz off. Native species, on the other hand, aren't always helpful. Mountain pine beetle outbreaks occur periodically in the forests of western North America. Millions of trees perish as the beetle larvae eat their way through the tree's trunks. The mountain pine beetle is currently killing more native North American trees than any other bug. It's a homegrown hazard. Land management. Instead of waging war on foreign species, Davis says, conservationists should figure out how to include them in land management plans. In general, he notes, the introduction of non-native species results in more species in a given habitat, not fewer. To Davis, the lesson is clear. Don't judge species on where they come from, judge them on what they are doing. Comprehension questions. Number 1. What is an invasive species? You should scan the first 3 paragraphs for invasive. A species that settles in a new region where it does harm to the environment, the economy, or human health. B, a species that naturally migrates to a new region where it can be helpful or harmful to the environment. C, a species that is native to a region where it does harm to the environment, the economy, or human health. D, a species that is introduced to a new region by human intervention where it can either do harm or be helpful to the environment. Number 2. Non-native species can cause significant damage to the regions where they are introduced. What evidence from the passage supports this conclusion? Which example shows damage? A. Scientists estimate that some 50,000 foreign species have settled in the U.S. B. The cane toad was introduced in Australia to eat the beetles that were destroying sugarcane crops. C. The zebra mussels clog pipes, causing millions of dollars in damage to power plants. D. The salt cedar shrub is now the favorite nesting site for the endangered southwestern willow flycatcher. Number 3. Which of the following accurately describes Tim Mayle's view of non-native species? Reread the section titled Toad Hype. A. Mayle believes that non-native species pose a threat to the web of life. B. Mayle believes that non-native species should find their own ecological niches. C. Mayle believes that adding another species in a region will help the web of life. D. Mayle believes that non-native species should be allowed to invade local niches. Number 4. What is this passage mostly about? Read the conclusion again, land management, because the conclusion summarizes the main idea of the whole article. How non-native species can help the environment they are in. B. Whether non-native species should always be considered hurtful. C. How conservationists work to control non-native species in an area. D. How non-native species can hurt the environment they are in. Number 5. Read the following sentences. Other times, non-native species are accidental tourists. Zebra mussels arrived in the Great Lakes after being inadvertently toted across the ocean in the ballast of ships. Think about what the prefix in means, such as incorrect, inability, inconsiderate, etc. Toted means carried. What does the word inadvertently mean? A. Purposefully. B. Intentionally. C. Meaningfully. D. Accidentally. Number 6. Choose the answer that best completes the sentence below. Many people believe that non-native species are always harmful to the region. Blank. Biologist Mark Davis believes that non-native species can be beneficial to a region given the right circumstances. What is the relationship between these two sentences? Are they supporting one another, adding on, or contrasting? A. In particular. B. However. C. Finally. D. Therefore. Number 7. Describe an example of how non-native species can be harmful to an environment. Use TOSEQ. Number 8. Describe an example of how non-native species can be helpful to an environment. Also use TOSEQ.